Hello.
Hi, Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov. Are you the person who's supposed to be leading tonight?
I am.
Okay.
Let me just see everyone else. I'm not sure what's going on with everyone else, but give us a couple.
They're coming back in. They just stepped out to let you in, and then they're coming back in.
Yeah, so I'm not sure what happened. But
How many times did you do the daf today?
I did the daf a couple times today.
Only two?
Only two. I got to do some more, right?
Well, we'll see.
It's a tough daf.
That's right. I did it, I think, 4 times.
Oh wow. Okay. Well, I gotta keep up. Okay.
Did they get back in?
Yes, it looks like it. Sorry, everyone, for the delay.
So weird.
There's one more person.
I don't know if I was logging on to a different site or something, but first I was on Dove's, which was the wrong one, and then it wanted a key of some sort. Either way, I'm here.
Okay.
Okay. So now we're missing Olivia.
Okay,
I had everybody get off so that you could get on potentially.
You can wait for her. I could send her an
That's the way
email.
to go.
Okay, let me do this.
Do you know why they didn't change the link? I don't understand why.
So they had created a new link, and then they said, "Forget about it. We'll go back to the, to the old."
But we were invaded the last time.
I heard.
It was very upsetting. I don't want that to happen again.
What was it? Was it?
Wednesday morning?
No. What was it? Was it like anti-Semitic?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. No, because there's also been like really troubling other things like porn and stuff like that.
Well, it was that too. It was both.
Oh, amazing. Okay.
Why are they?
Wait, let me tell you what they did.
For that happening.
They gave me something. I'm trying to find it. Sorry.
So what I explained to Dove is that one of the things he can do is he can set up like, the Zoom meeting can be set up with a waiting room where he, as a host, anyone who's the host, can only allow those people that he knows to get onto the meeting.
But do we have that set up right now?
So,
I don't know. I'm not the host, so I couldn't tell you.
What we have set up is that I can claim the host. I just don't know how to do it. And then if I'm the host, I can kick out anyone I want.
You can kick out, but do you have the ability to only let on those people that you want? That's a different thing.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. But I don't actually know how to become the host. So
click on the 3 dots at the bottom.
Oh, there we go.
More.
I don't see 3 dots. I think I have a screen under it. Hold on.
It's on top, probably.
Go to the
And
bottom.
then it says, the very first thing says sign in as a host.
But right now you might be able to claim it. So
I got it. Claim host. I got it. Okay. I got to find my code. Hold on. I apologize if this is because we got a big daf to do before. I don't want anyone to get Zoom bombed.
Yeah, it was very upsetting.
the reason why you're getting Zoom bombed is because you guys publish your link.
Right.
It's only being shared by email. I don't think that
it's on your website. It's on your website.
On the HR website. So anyways, I'm the host, so I can kick people out, I guess. But I'm not sure.
Don't kick me out. I'm new.
I think, but I don't think they actually were. You didn't actually see them as part. You didn't see that they had joined. They just were part of it.
Oh, that part I can't see. Okay, anyways, so someone will warn me, but let's learn the daf because it's late and we got to learn. It's not late, but it's late at night. Okay, today's a very exciting and very hard daf. So let's do it, and I'm sure there'll be questions. And stop me if I need to clarify anything, but Shavua Tov, everyone.
Shavua Tov.
So we are on today's daf is daf Ayin Aleph in Masechah Shabbos. We're going to start at the 2 dots, 6 lines from the bottom of Ayin Amud Bet. And I'm going to try to give you a quick summary of where we're starting because it's complicated. So the basic principle that we've learned many times is that if a person brings a carbon chatat for violating certain mitzvot in the Torah, and we're going to discuss more as we go on what they are, but certainly Shabbos counts as one of them. Torah says to keep Shabbos. If you don't keep Shabbos, you get Misa, you get killed. There's Kares, there's a Lav, there's a lot of levels. If a person does that Avera on purpose, b'mezid, then they are punished in, depending on whether they are warned from death, whether warned from Makot, etc. But if they do it b'shogeg, they bring a carbon chatas. And someone hear me? Everyone hear me?
I think you need to mute everybody.
It's breaking up.
Oh,
Okay, all right, just keep going.
okay. Tell me if you need me to. So the basic principle of bringing a carbon chatas is that you have to have once known that what you did wrong is wrong, and then forgotten that or lost that knowledge. And then after you do the sin, so at the time you did the chet, you didn't know that it was wrong, but you once knew it was wrong. And we've learned before how we learned this out from Psukim, that it can't be, and we learned this actually last week, you can't have, if you never knew something was wrong, meaning you skipped that day in school, and they told you not to wear shatnez, right? You never knew it was wrong. And then you wore shatnez, you don't bring a carbon chatas when you find out, because you never had what's called yidiyah b'tchila. You never knew before the act. Similarly, let's say a person knows that they're not allowed to wear shatnez, they wear shatnez because they forget, and then they bring a carbon chatas for something else, let's say, right? That carbon will not work, of course, for their sin, because you need to have what's called a yidiyah b'sof. You have to know after the fact that you did the thing wrong. Now, it's also the case that you can bring a carbon for one avera that counts for another avera. Now, our Mishnah discussed that Shabbos, although it seems like one mitzvah in the Torah, is treated like many mitzvot. And in fact, it's treated like 39, right? There's lamed tet melachot. Got to use all my right tenses here. 39 melachot, meaning that if a person forgets that it's Shabbos and does three things wrong, lights a fire, puts it out, plants their corn, right? Then because what they forgot, and this is what we learned last week, because what they forgot was one thing. They forgot that it was Shabbos. They only bring one carbon chatas. If they knew it was Shabbos, but forgot that these three things were prohibited, and so they did all three things wrong, then that person brings three carbonot, one for each avera. So one for burning, one for extinguishing, and one for planting, let's just say. Our examples today are going to be ketzira and techina. Right? You are kotzer, you harvested grain, and you did grinding. I don't know what the tense is. You ground grain. That's two separate melachot on Shabbat. You bring two separate carbonot, but only if you forgot the mitzvah, the avera, not if you forgot it was Shabbat. So today we get into a very complicated and exciting discussion as to how we combine averot for carbonot chatat. A couple other very important principles, some of which we're going to challenge today, but I'm going to lay them out here, is that there's a basic principle that if a person does an avera, let's say by mistake, person forgets you're not allowed to harvest on Shabbat, and they go outside and they harvest, and then they never recall that it's okay, that's usher to do. And the next Shabbat comes along, and they do it again, and they do it again. So you do it 3 times, 5 times. And then they remember, or someone tells them that you're not allowed to do this on Shabbat, they only bring one carbon for all of that, because there's only one forgetting. But if that person was reminded and realized, and then forgot again, then you would presumably bring a carbon for each forgetting. So you can bring many carbonot for one avera, as long as you had a yediyah beinatayim. In between, you knew that it was something wrong, okay? So let's start with these basic principles, and let's get into some really complicated applications. Says Rava, so 6 lines from the bottom. Amar Rava, let's say a person is katzar v'tachan kigrogert b'shigat Shabbat v'zadom melachot. A person forgets that it's Shabbos. They think it's Tuesday, or maybe they forget that you're not allowed to do this on Shabbos. I'm sorry, they forget the day. And they know, so it's shigagat Shabbat, meaning you forgot it was Shabbat, but zadom melachot, they know that you're not allowed to plant, or harvest or grind on Shabbat, but they did both of those things. A grogeret is just the amount that you need in order to be chayav, a date. The chazar v'katzar v'tachan kigrogeret. Oh, so I'm sorry. Let me pause there. So if the person then remembered that it was Shabbat, they would have to bring only one karban, even though they did 2 melachot, because since the shogeg was in Shabbat, it's only one karban. Then chazar v'katzar v'tachan kigrogeret. They go back again. Again, it could be the next week. It could be the same day later in the day. And he does ketzira and techina of the mount of a grogeret, and this time it's zadon Shabbat. He knows that it's Shabbat, and you're not allowed to do malacha on Shabbat, but he forgets shigigat melachot. He forgets that you're not allowed to do these melachot on Shabbat, right? So he forgot 2 melachot. Now remember, the rule is that if you do 2 melachot, you bring 2 karbanot. So presumably for the first act, he should bring 1, and for the second act, he should bring 2. But it's a little complicated because remember that if you do 2 ketzirot in a row, you only bring 1 for the 2 ketzirot. You do tchina 2 times in a row without knowing in between, you only bring 1 karban. So what do you do for this guy? Says Rava, he's then nodalo al ketzira utchina sheshigagat Shabbat v'zadom melacha. He then is reminded that the first act that he did was wrong. So now he's required to bring 1 karban. He forgot it was Shabbat. He did 2 things, but you still only bring 1 chatas. And then separately, chazar v'nodalo al ketzira v'al tchina shel Shabbat v'shigagat melachot. Then he's reminded, or he remembers, that the second act that he did was wrong, which is that he knew it was Shabbat, but he forgot the melachot. So now you would think he'd bring 2 karbanot. Okay? Says the Rava, shockingly, that kitzira, well, maybe not shockingly, but to me, kitzira gorer kitzira utchina gorer techina. That the fact, sorry, so I left out one important detail. After he remembered, he found out the first time that he did something wrong, he separated a karban chatat. Okay? So he separated an animal to be a chatat, because remember what he did, is he remembered that he did a malacha on Shabbat because he had forgotten it was Shabbat and he did 2 malachot. But since the forgetting was Shabbat, he separated 1 karban. Then he remembers that he did the second avera, which was 2. Says Rava, he doesn't need to bring any more karbanot. 1 karban is just fine. Why? Because kitzira, goreret kitzira, that the second prohibition of kitzira that he did will go along with, will be pulled by the first karban that he brings to be mechaper on his kitzira on Shabbat. Utchina, goreret techina. And the second act of techina that he did, of grinding, will be covered by the first karban that also covers the avera of techina on Shabbat. And so since he's bringing 1 karban that definitely will forgive him, or get him forgiveness for these 2 averot, the second averot that he did go along with it. That's what Rava says. Pretty interesting. But
Because he was alerted about the Shabbat side of the problem. Correct.
Well, but the next says Rava continues. Let's say he only, to remember, this guy did 4 things wrong. So on the first Shabbat, he forgot it was Shabbat, and he did Ktsira and Tchina. On the second Shabbat, he remembered it was Shabbat, but he forgot that you're not allowed to do these 2 acts. So he did Ktsira and Tchina. For the first one, he would in theory bring 1 karban, because he forgot Shabbat. And for the second one, 2 karbanot. He does all of this, and then says Rav in the second line, if he's nodalo al Ktsira shel zadon Shabbat, he remembers, or he's told, about half of his act, just the Ktsira that he did on the second week. I'm going to split up the weeks for easiness, right? And he only remembers the Ktsira, not the Tchina. And he knows Shigat Melachot, and he says, oh my gosh, I harvested this grain, it was Shabbat, I forgot that you're not allowed to harvest on Shabbat. And he separates a karban to forgive him for that 1 act of Ktsira on Shabbat. Says Rava, Ktsira gorer Ktsira, utchina she'ima. That karban will forgive him not only on the Ktsira that he did on the second Shabbat, but also the Ktsira he did on the first Shabbat, because Ktsira goes together because they're both harvesting. And since the Ktsira that he did on the first Shabbat was done in the same forgetting of Shabbat that would go along with the grinding, it will also stretch to forgive him for Tchina shekinegda, right? So Tchina she'ima, the Tchina that's with that first Avera, that first Shabbat, okay? Because since in the first Shabbat, he forgot it was Shabbat, and he knew that he's not allowed to do Ktsira and Tchina, and so if we only bring 1 karban chatas, therefore, since this karban will work for the Ktsira, it also works for the Tchina. And so he does not need to bring another karban for the act of grinding in the first Shabbat. However, the Tchina shekinegda, the grinding that he did on the second Shabbat, that's b'mekoma omedet, that stands where it is. This karban will not forgive him for that, and he has to bring another karban to forgive him for that. So basically, says Rava, you can go 1 level, and that since you did 2 harvestings without knowing in between that what you did was wrong, right? You never realized that you did an avera because you never caught on. So therefore, the second karban, the karban on the second act will forgive the first act because it's all joined together. And since the first act included, the first Shabbat, I would say, included also forgetting Shabbat and therefore also the Tchina, it will forgive you for that sin of grinding on Shabbat. But it will not work for the sin of grinding on the second Shabbat, which is a totally separate act than the Ketzira.
Nava.
Well, I'm not Nava, I should change my name, but I'm Eli.
Ellie, can I interject something? I'm not sure if you're saying this, but this is what I'm trying to say.
Go for it. Well, one second. Hold on 1 second. Let me read the next line, and then we'll listen. So it says Abaya Amar. Abaya says, I disagree, and I think that you don't even need to bring a karban for the second grinding, because Techina nami gorera Techina, because Shem Techina achati. That says Rava and Abaya, and Abaya, Rashi refers to this, Tosfos also refers to this as what we call greira ligreira, meaning a second step of dragging together a responsibility. Says Abaya, again, because you're separated a karban to bring for your harvesting the ktsira that you did on the second Shabbat, or the second instance, it will also forgive you for the ktsira you did on the first Shabbat. And because the ktsira you did on the first Shabbat was done in the same halama, the same forgetting that included a tchina, a grinding, it will get you a kapara for that grinding. Once it works for the tchina you did on the first time, it will go another step, and it will also forgive you for the tchina you did on the second Shabbat. Even though there's seemingly no connection, but once a sort of a karban can be applied across different occurrences of a chet, it will go even further and forgive you for all of those occurrences. Yes.
So I'm going to interject this and see what you think. So you had two cases of reaping and grinding.
Correct.
The guy reaped and ground twice, but the Isser was he forgot Shabbat, and the second one was he forgot the malachas.
Correct.
If he forgot Shabbat, we know he brings one korban. If he forgot malachas, he would bring for each, so he'd be bringing two.
Correct.
So now comes the news reporter who brings the bad news to him. And it depends what he brings the bad news about. If he brings the bad news about his Shabbat violation as opposed to his Malacha violation, if he brings about the Shabbat violation, we know he brings one korban. Correct?
Correct.
He forgot Shabbat. How many korbans does he bring? He brings one. As far as the second two grinding and reaping that he did, which involved malachas where you would think he'd have to bring two, he doesn't. Because the snitching was on the Shabbat issue. And because it was all done in one chalam, therefore he's putter on the second set completely. They're tied into the first korban. They get dragged along. He's pater from violating the malachas, the second two grinding and reaping. He's pater on them. Why? Because he got snitched on the first two, which were Shabbat violations, and you only bring one korban on that. And why is he pater on the bottom two, the second two, call them C and D, is because he got snitched on Shabbos, which is one korban, and because he did all these actions in one chelam, he was never warned in between, therefore it's one korban, period. It's like one big Shabbos violation. Now if the guy's other way, he snitched on him and says, oh, you broke malachas, my friend, therefore he has to bring two korbans. But now we want to look at A and B where he broke Shabbat violations. We want to look at A and B where he broke Shabbat violations. We say, it's true you broke these malacha violations. I snitched on you. I brought it to your attention. So so you should have to bring two. And maybe you should have to bring more for the ones above, the ones you did earlier. Said no, because it was in one chalam. I excuse your reaping. And because your first reaping and grinding were done as a Shabbat violation, you can drag them together. Then what about the other one at the bottom there that we haven't accounted for? This Rava says, I'm sorry, I don't allow 2 draggings, but Abaya says yes.
So what you said, yeah, I think is what we said, but I just want to clarify one thing. So there's one point that was not correct, but everything else I think was. So the case that we discussed is not where you were told about both things, because it's not so clear what would happen if you found out about both averot.
No, you were snitched about. It's 2 separate cases, right?
No, so let's say, no, so let me be clarified. So you did not find out, according to the Gemara that we had, our Gemara, that you did both problems wrong in the second case. You did not find out about C and D. You only found out about one of them. You found out about C or D, one or the other. It's not so clear what would happen if you found out about both, right? Because then you might have to separate 2 karbanot. But again, the case here, and let's continue because it'll become clear as we go through more cases, is when, again, the halacha, the basic halacha is if you do 2, 3, or 5, or 20 sins, without knowing in between, you bring 1 karban for all of that, if it's the same avera. And here is the principle of what is dragged along. So what's gorer?
Okay, you're right. I missed your point.
Different, but again, in the second, but everything else I think is absolutely correct. It's where you only knew about one of them, and so according to Abaya, you can get away with bringing 1 karban for all of these sins, and according to Rava, you would have to bring a second one. But everyone agrees that if you first brought or found out and separated a karban for the first act, which included 2 different actions on Shabbat, that in fact would cover the second 2, and you'd only bring 1 karban. Ask the Gemara. Let's keep going. Mi itle the Rava greer. Now, does Rava really? Now, remember, Rava stretched it in one way. Abaya stretched it 2 ways. But Rava said that if you remembered on Shabbat, or so you were told that on the second Shabbat you just did 1 avera, you just did katsira, that not only will count for the katsira you did on the first Shabbat, which everybody agrees with, but it will cover the techina, the grinding, sounds like food, the techina that you did on the first Shabbat as well, even according to Rava. Ask the Gemara, mi itle the Rava greer. Does Rava even hold that? By itma. We have another case, which again is going to clarify all of this. Says this is a memra, achal shnei zeitei chelev behelam echad. You eat 2 pieces of non-kosher meat, of chelev, of fat, in one forgetting. So you forget that you're not allowed to go and eat treif meat. You go and you have 2 hamburgers, right? So you forgot. Now, presumably, if then someone said you ate 2 hamburgers, you would bring 1 karban. But you didn't find out that you ate 2 hamburgers, or you didn't remember. Nodalo al chatmeya, right? You were told, oh, by the way, wherever you went for breakfast this morning was serving treif food, okay? You happened to go there for lunch too, but you didn't realize that yet. Or maybe you went somewhere else. So that you found out that you did 1 avera of eating chelev. And then, sounds like there was a lot of kashrus issues in this town. You then go eat a 3rd kazayit before you even found out that the second one that you ate was improper, okay? And then you find out about all of them. So you ate 3 kazaytim of chelev. The first 2 you ate without realizing you did something wrong. You then found out that the first one was wrong, and then you ate a 3rd one. So think of the sets here. 1 and 2 go together, right? Because you ate them both without knowing that you had done something wrong. And 2 and 3 go together because you didn't know after you ate 2, before you ate 3, that you did something wrong. But 1 and 3 do not go together because after number 1, you found out that it was wrong. Then you made the mistake again. Maybe you forgot that it was wrong or whatever mistake you made. So that's the case, okay? Now, obviously, they set up this case for this halachic discussion. Amar Rava, says Rava, what do you do in this case? It depends. You can bring a karban, and it depends on what you say when you bring your karban. If you're hevi karban al rishon, if you bring a karban for the first one, you say, I'm doing this for the first one, then rishon l'sheni mitkaprin. It works for the first and the second, because you did the 2 averot, then you realized it was wrong, now you bring the karban. If you say, but shlishi eno mitkaper, but it doesn't count for the 3rd, because that was a separate halama, a separate forgetting. Hevi karban ala shlishi, if you bring the karban and say, I'm doing this for the 3rd avera, then shlishi v'sheni mitkaprin, number 3 and number 2 you get a kapara for, but rishon eno mitkaper. It doesn't work for the first because again, that was a separate forgetting because you remembered the first before you did the 3rd. Hevi karban ala emtsai, if you're smart, and you say, I'm bringing this karban for the middle one, then because the middle one is part of both sets, nitkapru kulan. They all get a kapara, right? And that's what we call greira, essentially. That basically the I'm sorry, it's not what we call Greira. That's not Greira. That's directly, you had one halama together. Says Abaya says, I totally disagree. And we expect Abaya to disagree. Abaya says, Afilu hevi karban alecha mehem nitkapru kulan. Even if you bring a karban for one of them, they should all be forgiven. Because think about it. Let's say you bring a karban on the first sin. You know that's going to count for the second one, right? Because they're in the same forgetting. But the second one is part of a set with the third one. And so by the principle of Gereira, the kapara on the second one automatically pulls over to the third one. But what you see from here is that Rava does not even hold of that principle. And so going back to Shabbos, again, this is very confusing, so stop me if I need to repeat it, but going back to Shabbos, you bring a karban for the kitzira that you did on the second Shabbos. We said that counts for the kitzira you did on the first Shabbos, and it pulls in the techina you did on the first Shabbos. Rava agreed to that. Here, Rava does not seem to agree to Greira. Rava doesn't say that bringing a karban on the first sin will clear up the third one. Says, you're right. Rava here did not say that, but he changed his mind. Batar deshama me Abaya, after Abaya explained this whole logic of pulling in another thing, Savra, then Rava thought of the same idea or agreed with the idea. Says, well, if Rava really likes what Abaya said, why doesn't he agree with him totally? Right? And then why doesn't Rava agree with Abaya that the karban should drag in the second tchina? Again, if you bring a karban for the kitzira on the second Shabbat, which includes the kitzira on first Shabbat, and then drags in the tchina on the first Shabbat, why doesn't it also drag in the tchina on the second Shabbat? Says the Gemara, because he only holds one level. Greira itle, you can pull things in, but greira to greira letle, you can't pull even more things in. And so that's the limitation. James, ask your question out loud. Let me read it. You did a second kitzira. Whoa. It's a good question. So why is the greira tzechina if there was never a separate, I don't understand exactly.
You did the kitzira and tefina for getting Shabbos. So that was a single korban. You then did a second kitzira, and that kitzira pulls the first
kitzira.
Right, the first kitzira.
Well, that's not called pulling. That's automatic.
Okay, so but why are you saying it pulls the greira? It pulls the techina if that kitzira and techina were never separated anyway? Yeah.
So it's a good question. So the reason we're calling that, I think we're calling that gereira, is that because the second karban was only for an act of kitzira, right? The second act of kitzira was done separate from the tchina. But that's why Rava agrees to the greira. It's because there's only one karban required for those two acts together. The fact that the second kitzira brings in the first kitzira, which is not called greira, that's automatic. It pulls together the tchina. Which, let me just be clear, it's very similar.
You might have thought that you would owe a second korban for that initial act, even though half the act was already covered?
Correct.
Okay.
That would have been the thought. We'll get to, there are people who actually say that, but that would have been the thought. So, and the Gemara points at, well, not exactly that point, but let's keep going. Says the Gemara, Milta de pshitale la baya virava miboy l'Reb. In fact, this issue, which was so obvious to Abaya and Rava, which is that one karban works for both, that in fact was a question that Rabbi Zera asked. The boy Rabbi Zera, Rabbi Asi, Rabbi Zera asked the following question from Rabbi Asi. Most people take out the next few words because it doesn't make that much sense, but some keep them in. But anyway, somebody like Bamine Rabbi Zera. Rabbi Zera asked the following question. Let's say you are katsar v'tachan chatzi grogeret b'shigagat Shabbat v'zadom melacha. Right? Let's say a person does kitzira and techina, but not a full amount. He does half of an amount, right? So you grind half a cup, let's say. I'm picking, the grogeret is not a cup, but let's say you grind half a shear, forgetting that, remember, this is the case. Shigagat Shabbat v'zadom melacha. You forgot it was Shabbat, but you knew that you're not allowed to do this act on Shabbat. Okay, so it's a shogeg, but you're not chayav a korban for half a shear. Then chazar v'katzar v'tachan, you go back and you do it again, and again a chatzi grogeret, but this time you're zadon Shabbat v'shigagat melacha, right? You forget that you're not allowed to do this melacha, but you remember that it's Shabbat. So mahu sheyitztarfu. That was his question. Would that ketzira that you did? Now remember, you did half a ketzira b'shogeg. You did another half a ketzira b'shogeg, but it was a different kind of shogeg. One time you didn't remember Shabbat, and one time you didn't remember ketzira. Okay. His question was, does that combine? Is that a full ketzira? So Amar Le, the answer that Reb Zera got was chalukin. Where am I? Chalukin the chataot v'lo mitztarfin. They are separate for chataot, and they do not combine. You could not bring one karban chatat for both of these, which goes against everything that Abai and Rava just said. Right? Abai and Rava said, let's say you do a whole shir one Shabbat, forgetting it's Shabbat. You do a whole shir next Shabbat, forgetting that you're not allowed to do harvesting or whatever, tchina. You bring one karban that automatically covers both because it's the same act of kitzira, the same act of tchina. And then they had a discussion about greira, but the discussion of greira can't even start unless one act covers the other. It says Reb Zera here, I don't even know if that's true, and in fact, I don't think it's true. That because the shogeg was a different shogeg, you cannot bring one karban for both of those things.
You don't bring any.
You don't bring any in this case, absolutely correct, because you did half, and that equals 0. Says the Gemara, but is that even, one second, let's get to this point. Is it true that when two acts are separate for chataot, meaning they don't combine for one karban, that they are separate acts, meaning you bring two karbanot, if you do two things, a full share, of course, of each one, that they're not mitztaref? Is that true? Well, it's not. We have a Mishnah. The Mishnah says the following. The Mishnah increases. It says the Mishnah, let's say you eat a piece of chalev and then another piece of chalev without knowing that it was wrong. You bring one karban. And we're going to ask in a second, that seems very obvious. Right? This is the most basic principle we all know. But continues the Mishnah. Let's say you're achal, chalev, v'dam, v'notar, v'pigu, v'helam echad. Forget all of these things, right? And you end up eating a big sandwich with chalev, a little bit of blood thrown in there, some notar, some pigu, very tasty, right? Says the Mishnah, they're different avirot. Chayav al kol achat v'achat. You have to bring 4 karbanot in that case. And zu chomer b'minin harbe min achad. That is something that, of course, is an astringency when they're different minim. So you can eat 4 pieces. You can eat 4 pieces of chalev. You bring 1 karban, but you eat 4 pieces, and each one's a different avirah. You do 4 karbanot. Now, this all seems pretty obvious to us because we're very knowledgeable. But let's keep going. The zu chomer b'min echad miminin harbe. What is more chamor when you're talking about one min, one type of avirah? Shem acha chatzi zayit. Let's say you eat half a hamburger, and then later, now Rashi says this is bichtei achilat pras, right? So within a reasonable amount of time, you eat a second half of the hamburger, then you have to bring a karban, because half and half equals 1. But if you eat, but if you eat, let's say you eat half a hamburger, and then you eat half a cake of blood, right? So shnei minim, then you're patur, because hamburger, chalev, which is what I'm calling hamburgers here, but chalev and blood do not combine. Now, so that's the Mishnah. The Havinama, now the people in the Beit Midrash were sitting around and they thought, and they asked a question. The Mishnah says, min echad chayav, that if you eat 2 pieces of one min that you're chayav, stricha l'meimer? I don't get it. What's the chiddush? Why would you have to tell me that if you eat 2 pieces of one min, you're chayav? So said Reish Lakish, we're telling you, Mishum Bar Tutni, Reish Lakish said in the name of Bar Tutni, it's talking about where you ate 2 different dishes. So you ate half a whatever the shear, right? Half a size, half a kazayas of chalev in a cholent, and then you ate half a kazayas of chalev in a stew. And the fact is that even though this is all shogeg, yeah. I mean, maybe it's the same halacha, but it's all shogeg we're talking in this Mishnah. You ate them in 2 different pots. And so why would that matter? The Rabbi Yeshua, this is Rabbi Yeshua. The Amar Tamchuyim Mechalkin. Rabbi Yeshua, in fact, is of the opinion that if, let's say, you eat a kizayit of chalev in one dish, and then you take a different dish and eat another kizayit of chalev, says Rabbi Yeshua, you got to bring 2 karbanot. Tamchuyim or Mechalkin. Even though it's one avera, because they're totally one sin, right? Because they're different dishes, you have to bring 2. So
one baked and one,
I would have thought that
one baked, one fried.
I would have thought that Rabbi Yeshua is going, whether you're talking about lekula or lechumra, meaning whether or not it's talking about for combining two things together, or for making it that you only bring one karban, right? Kamash malan, therefore we're trying to teach you the lekula lo amar, lechumra ka amar, that he didn't say it lekula, meaning in a case where it would make life easier for you, he didn't say it. So if, let's say, you ate 2 kazeitim of chelev in 2 different dishes, right? That's the chumrah. Then says Rabbi Yeshua, you got to bring 2 karbanot. But let's say you ate half a kazait in one dish and half a kazait in another dish. Rabbi Yeshua there does not say that they're split up. Rabbi Yeshua says that you combine those 2. And so it's not a kula, meaning you can't say I'm pater for bringing a karban. I got to bring a karban, even though half a kazait was in one dish and half a kazait was in another dish. Okay? Now, ask the Gemara, let's get back to this question. Hahacha, the chalukin the chataot, right? These 2 dishes are separate entities to require you to bring 2 karbanot, become itzdarfi. But we're saying here that they can combine half a zayit and half a zayit to go together. And this goes against what we just said earlier. We asked the question, do you combine half a kitzira from one Shabbat and half a ketzira from another Shabbat? And we said, you don't. And here we're saying you do. Amar le, Gemara says, no, you're misunderstanding the whole Mishnah, or not the whole Mishnah. You're misunderstanding what Reish Lakish says about the Mishnah. Mar, you said, Aresha Matmila, that Rav Reish Lakish was referring to the first part of the Mishnah, the Kashala. Anan, Aseifa Matminan La. We actually understood Reish Lakish referring to the Seifa of the Mishnah, below Kashla, right? What's the Seifa? In the Seifa, it says that if you eat mishnei minin, if you eat half a zayit of 2 different types, you're patur. So again, you eat half a kazayit of meat and half a kazayit of blood. That doesn't combine. Ask the Gemara, ask Reish Lakish. Tzricha l'meimar. What's the chiddush? The Amar Reish Lakish mishum bar tutni leolam. What the Mishnah means is not 2 minim. It means mimin echad. It means even if half a kazayit is chelev and the other half a kazayit is chelev. Why are we calling it 2 minim? Amai karele shnei minim she'achnu b'shnei tamchuyim. That's where Reish Lakish said, because you ate it in 2 tamchuyim, in 2 different dishes, therefore it's called shnei minim, and you are not chayev. And that's Rabbi Yeshua. Damar tamchuyim mechalkim. Rabbi Yeshua, in fact, does hold that different dishes are different entities. And, hakamash malan, Rabbi Yeshua, bein lekula, bein lechumra. That goes in all circumstances, bein lekula, bein lechumra. So whether or not, if you eat chelev in 2 different dishes, if it's a kazayit in each one, you bring a karban for each one. And if it's half a zayit for each one, then they do not combine. Because if you can't bring a separate karban, then you can't combine it to one karban. Now says the Gemara, if that's true, then the Seifa, if the end of the Mishnah is talking about min echad shnei tamchuyim, 1 type of food, meaning chelev, and 2 tamchuyim, then michlal dereisha min echad v'tamchuy echad, then it must be that the first part of the Mishnah is referring to 1 type and 1 pot, right? It says, if that's the case, min echad v'tamchuy echad tzricha l'meimar, why do you have to tell me that a person who ate half a zayit, right, of chelev, and then ate another half a zayit of chelev in the same pot, in the same dish, in the same thing, that they have to bring a karban? Everyone knows that, right? If you eat a bite and you wait 30 seconds, eat another bite, they're going to be mitzdarif. Amar Rav Huna, this is a great halacha. We're talking about a case where you ate 1 bite of your sandwich. Someone said to you, wait, stop eating that. It's chelev. You're like, oh my gosh, I forgot. And then, of course, like it happens to many of us, 30 seconds later, you pick up the sandwich and take another bite. So you had a yediyah in between. And so you ate half a kazayit, you were told it was wrong. You ate another half a kazayit, you were told it was wrong. I might have thought, Rabbi Gamliel, and so Rabbi Gamliel, Amar ein yediyah l'chatzi shir. Rabbi Gamliel says an astounding halacha. We're going to get into this more actually later. Rabbi Gamliel says that doesn't count as a yediyah. Yediyah means you found out that you did something wrong. And since eating half a sandwich is not wrong, right? The isser of chelev is only eating a kazayit. Finding out that you ate half a kazayit of chelev does not count like finding out anything. No one told you did an aveira. You did half of an aveira, which is 0. And so therefore it doesn't count. And therefore, the fact that you ate half a kazayit, someone told you it was wrong, you forgot, of course. If you didn't forget, it doesn't matter. And you ate the other half, that combines and makes it a full zayit, and now you can bring a karban chatat.
Even if you didn't forget it, you don't bring a chatat. You did half b'mezid and half.
And you don't. No, absolutely not.
Right. So it doesn't matter if you remember it or not.
It does. Well, you have to forget again, though, because if you didn't forget again, right? If you knew that it was wrong, the second one doesn't count.
Half a shiur b'mezid and half a shiur
You do not bring a karban.
Would not
Right.
combine.
Correct. But here you did half a shir b'shogeg. You
Yeah.
then found out that it was wrong, and then you
Right,
ate
I
another half a
understand.
shir b'shogeg.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah.
So, again, these are not thought to be common cases. They're thought to be illustrative cases.
Right.
Continues the Gemara. I know everyone's very tired and it's not getting easier. Itmar. Now let me go through another complicated case. Achal shnei zeitei chalav behelam echad. Let's say a person eats 2 kazeitim of chalev in one forgetting, meaning I forgot that I'm not allowed to eat chalev. I went to McDonald's, I ate a burger, I went back the next day and ate it again. Okay? And then nodalo ala rishon. And then someone told me, oh, by the way, you went yesterday and ate something wrong. I was like, oh my gosh, I really messed up. So presumably I have to bring a karban chatat, right? And then chazar v'nodalo ala sheni. And then at a later time, you found out that you did the second one wrong. So says Rabbi Yochanan, Amar chayav shtayim. You got to bring 2 karbanot. We're going to discuss in detail what this means. But you got to bring, it was 2 separate actions. It was 2 separate yidiot. You found out separately. You bring 2 karbanot. Reish Lakish Amar, Eino chayav ela achat. You only bring 1. Now, Rabbi Yochanan Amar chayav, because the pasuk says, al chatato vehevi. Right? The pasuk says that you should bring a karban al chatato for your individual sin and bring it. The implication being that sometimes you need to bring a karban for each individual sin. Says Rabbi Yochanan, that's this case. You knew about 1, and then you found out about the second, you bring 2 karbanot. Reish Lakish says, you're patur, because the pasuk says fascinatingly, mei chatato v'nislachlo. You bring it from your chatat. What does mei chatato mean? Implying you only bring a karban for part of your chat, and that counts for everything. So let's say this case, where you only found out about 1 sin, you're going to bring a karban for that 1 sin. It counts for all of your sins. In this case, because you did them both behalem echad. Says the Gemara once, that's great. But what about the other pasuk? Reish Lakish aktiv al chatato ve'evi. It also says that you bring 1 for each sin. It says Reish Lakish, that's the achar kapara. That's if, let's say you actually brought the karban, right? You did, again, you ate 2 pieces of chalev with 1 forgetting. Then you remembered the first one, and you went and brought your karban in the Beit HaMikdash. Then you remembered the second one. Says Reish Lakish, I admit, you got to bring a second karban. But if, let's say, you didn't bring the karban yet, you just separated it, let's say, then you don't have to bring a second one. Oh, the Rabbi Yochanan nami aktiv mechatato v'nislachlo. According to Rabbi Yochanan, how do you understand the pasuk, which implies that sometimes you only have to bring a karban for part of your chat, and it will work for everything. Again, we're learning that from mechatato, which means part of it from your chatat. Says Rabbi Yochanan, that pasuk is referring to achal mayaskinan. Let's say you ate a kazayit and a half of chalev, and nodalo al kazayit. Someone then told you, oh, that first kazayit you ate was chalev, so you have to bring a karban. And then your chazar v'achal chatzi zayit acher behelamoshel sheni. You then eat another half a zayit without knowing that the half that you ate in the first time was wrong. So now you have 1 kizayit, right, from the 2 separate halamot. Says the Gemara, Ma'od Tema Litztarfu. I might have thought that those 2 kizaytim come together. Kemash Malan, that they don't. Why don't they? Because since the first karban is going to work for the kizayit and a half that you ate, the second kizayit doesn't combine. It doesn't require you to bring another karban. So that's a very, very unique case. Okay.
Because it dragged it along?
So this is, again, not, dragging is really only a concept that we use when you go 1 extra step. But the reason is that because you had 1 halama, right, 1 act, you forgot, and you do a kizayit and a half in that one, the karban that you separate for the kizayit will also cover the entire act that you did, meaning including the other half kizayit. So basically, that sort of gets you coverage for that 1 and a half, and so the new half doesn't have anything to add to. But let's see. The question, of course, I haven't addressed is that when you found out, what did you do? And that's the next question of the Gemara. Amrle Ravina the Ravashi said Ravina to Ravashi, this whole question of Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, the itiyadale kodem hafrasha pligi, says Ravina to Ravashi, is it the case that they're talking about where you found out that what you did was wrong before you were mafrish the karba, right? Meaning, again the case, you ate two zaitim of chaylev, one and then the other. Then you found out that the first one that you did, you realized that the first one was an isser. Is that the case? And basically that's called yidiot, right? So you found out about one, and then you find out about the second one. Is that where Rabbi Yochanan says you have to bring two karbanot? Because why? The Mar Savar, because Rabbi Yochanan holds that yidiot michalkot, that the knowledge of each one requires its own karban, and Mar Savar and Reish Lakish holds hafrashot michalkot, that in fact it's not the knowledge, it's the separating of an animal, so that if you had set aside an animal for the first one and then found out about the second one, you'd have to bring two. But just knowledge does not require that. But if, let's say, you had found out about one and then separated an animal for it, for your karban chatat, and then you found out about the second one, modile Reish Lakish, the Rabbi Yochanan, the Chayav Shtayim, then maybe Reish Lakish would agree that because you already did the act of separating one animal when you only knew about one prohibition, you have to bring a second one. O Dilma, or maybe they argue even the Tiagile La'achar Hafrasha Pli. Maybe it's where you found out after you separated an animal, meaning you did two chataot, right, two kizaitim of chelev. You separated, you found out that the first one was a problem. You set aside your animal, and then you found out about the second one. And maybe b'hapli, the marsa b'hafrashot mechalkot, maybe Reb Yochanan holds that the fact that you separated an animal means that you have to bring a second one for the second sin. Umar Savar, and then Reish Lakish holds kaparot mechalkot, that it's only the actual slaughtering on the mizbeach, the kapara, that will separate them. But the fact that even though you put aside an animal for one sin, the fact that you haven't brought it on the mizbeach yet, if you then find out about the second one, it will count for both. Aval kodem hafrasha, but perhaps if it was before you even set aside an animal, meaning you just found out about one sin, you didn't set aside an animal yet, and then you found out about the second one, maybe there, Modi Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish Eino Chai V'la Achat. O Dilma, Ben Bezu Machloket. Maybe they disagree whether you set aside the animal or didn't set aside the animal. Maybe they disagree in all cases. So how do you understand this? Said Ravina to Ravashi. Amarle said Ravina to Ravashi to Ravina, sorry, Nistavra Ben Bezu Machloket. I would think from reading this that they argue in all the cases. That whether or not, again, you found out about one, whether you separated a karban or didn't separate a karban, Rabbi Yochanan says you bring two, and Reish Lakish says you bring one. Why do I think that? If it's the way you said it first time, that it's only that they argued before you set aside the animal. That Reish Lakish agrees to Rabbi Yochanan that once you set aside an animal, you have to set aside a second animal for the other sin. Then why did he say that Adamukim leikra la'achar kapara? Why did he say that the pasuk of al chatato was referring to where you already got kapara, right? That's where you can bring a second karban. Look mi la'achar frasha. You should have said it's after you set it aside, not after you get a kapara, right? The achar frasha pligi avokodem hafrasha modele Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish eino chai v'la achat. If it's the other way, that they only argue after you set aside an animal, but before you set aside an animal, Rabbi Yochanan would agree you only bring one. Then Adamukim leikra because mechza. Why did Rabbi Yochanan have to come up with this crazy case where you ate 1.5, and then you knew about one, and then you ate another half? Look me kodem hafrasha. Why doesn't he say it's talking about the pasuk is referring to a case where you haven't yet been mafresh the animal, and that's where bringing for one sin will cover for the other sin. This is where you're right, but that's not a proof. Because maybe Sluki Misafkalai, maybe the person saying over this explanation or of Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish wasn't sure how far they were going. The Intim Salom Kamar, we were saying, even if they argue in that case, I have a way to explain the pasuk. Intim Salom Kamar Frasha Pligi Rabbi Yochanan Hechi Mukile the Kra. If Rabbi Yochanan even argued, even Kodem Frasha, then you'd have to explain the pasuk of this crazy case. Kezaitu Mechza. or you ate 1.5. The intim salomer la'achar frasha pligi reish lakish hechimuki lekora kilachar kapara. So it's not a proof from this statement of one way or the other, and we don't have an answer at the end the answer is, well, we don't have an answer at the end, but we're going to go that they argue about both, that Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish have this argument as to whether yidiyah, whether knowledge about what you did is enough to require you to bring a karban, and after that you have to bring a separate karban. And so I'm sure that's all clear to everybody, because tomorrow we're going to get into more complex cases. But these are challenging Gemarot. I'll acknowledge that. Very challenging. Not necessarily the easiest on a Saturday night, but thank you all for your effort.
It's interesting, actually.
Yeah, no, it's interesting, but it's very challenging. Tosfos points out, and Rashi as well, that it seems that Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish totally disagree with everything we talked about in Amud Aleph, right? Just to be clear. So, right, because in the beginning part, Rava and Abaya. So it's not clear that Rava and Abaya agree at all with Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. It seems like they probably go according to Reish Lakish, right? Who says you only bring one, but that's a little bit more complex about how you understand that. But we'll take each Gemara on its own. It's a little easier.
Yes.
Okay, Yashikra.
Shavuot Tov.
Shavuot Tov.
Shabbat tov. Thank you.
They're just exploring concepts here. No, but this can't happen in real life, right? I mean,
Well, that's the Gemara always does that, right? So we try to understand.
I understand. Right.
I mean, I wouldn't say it couldn't happen. I would say it's not likely to happen.
Right. No, but right. I mean,
But it's very interesting, the concept of the sandwich. Is it more hamur to, or sensation seeking, or Epicurean or hedonistic to eat a little bit of 4 different things which are prohibited?
no, but he did it by accident.
One thing which is prohibiting. It's a very interesting concept for if it was to discern what is really a sin, sinfulness.
That's true.
It's very, very philosophical.
We like that. Okay, thank you all. Shavuot Tov.
Ellie,
Okay.
Reb Ellie,
I hope.
Reb Ellie.
Yes,
Excellent.
thank you.
Yes, it was.
Please join us. It's very hard. We know.
I missed that one thing. I missed that he only reported on him about the one side. I didn't catch that. You caught that in my
Oh, good. Okay,
Yeah,
Shavuot Tov. I'm going to run.
I didn't catch that. Okay, thank you.
I hope you can join us tomorrow.
Thank you. I'll do my best.
Take care.
Bye.